Today we'll be reading from 1 Kings 19, verses 1 to 9. Now Ahab told Jezebel everything Elijah had done and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. So Jezebel sent a message to Elijah to say, "May the gods deal with me to be ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like that one of them." Elijah was afraid and ran for his life. When he came to Beersheba in Judah, he left his servant there, while he himself went a day's journey into the wilderness. He came to a broom bush, sat down under it, and prayed that he might die. "I have had enough, Lord," he said. "Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors." Then he lay down under the brush tree and fell asleep. All at once an angel touched him and said, "Get up and eat." He looked around, and there by his head was some baked bread over hot coals and a jar of water. He ate and drank and then lay down again. The angel of the Lord came back and a second time and touched him and said, "Get up and eat, for the journey is much too for you." So he got up and ate and drank. Strengthened by the food, he travelled for 40 days and 40 nights until he reached Horeb, the mountain of God. There he went into the cave and spent the night.
Well, we've started with a new series in our church called When My World Changed. And last Sunday, I've spoken to you on one aspect which happens when your world changes. And we spoke about Job when we deal with tragedy in our lives. Today, I want to talk to you about the journey of loneliness. And there's a person that really depicts loneliness in a very special way to me. And that is the person of Elijah, especially after certain circumstances. So we find that Elijah deals with loneliness in a certain way, which many people today do find a huge challenge. So in today's circumstances, we have lockdown, we have isolation, we have lots of restrictions on our lives, and people find themselves in a specific spot of being lonely. I always say to people, you can be amongst people, but you can be lonely. These days, as I've done some home visits over the last couple of weeks, I found people sitting by themselves alone in their house for weeks on end, not having any visitors. You just imagine how that would feel. I think back of many years ago, if I can share something personally with you, and maybe it sometimes makes me emotional. Before we came to Australia, my mom was a person that went through a very difficult time in her life. And I can remember one Sunday we drove to another neighborhood where my grandmother was. And my mom lived in that same area. She lived in a granny flat at the back of people's houses after my dad and she got divorced. And as Erna and I was driving with the boys up the street, I could see this bent over figure walking up the road. And I realized it was my mom. And when she approached us, I said to her, "Mom, where are you going?" She said, "No, I'm going back to my house." And I said, "Can I give you a lift? We're going to Grandma. Do you want to come with us?" And she looked at me and you could see the punishment and the strain of years of struggle on her face. And she said, "No, I'll do this myself." You can't force people to do things, so we went off to my grandmother's place. But as I drove away, and I never thought that years later, in another country, I would think of my mom and the loneliness that she experienced in her life, irrespective if there was children around her or not. But we were not always, unfortunately, there for her. But she was a very lonely person. And she had a very lonely life. And I tell you, in the world that we live, we find that things change quickly. Circumstances change very quickly. And we find this drastic change sometimes too hard to cope with. And Elijah is a typical picture of how you would have all the great things in life, and all of a sudden, your life changes. And as we have read in 1 Kings chapter 19, You know, Elijah, before chapter 19, he was on the Mount of Carmel. He called down fire from God and it devoured the sacrifice and the water. And eventually all these idol worshippers were killed by him, 400 of them. And they were on top of the mountain. I mean, God listened to them. And the people were just having victory and cheers and miracles and celebrations. Everybody was going, whoo, 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 Elijah, Elijah. No, they weren't doing that. What they really did was, they bowed down in reverence to God and they said, the Lord is God, the Lord is God. There was no Elijah in this story. Elijah was just the instrument of God. But there was huge celebrations. This is the time that we love in our life. It's a time of being on top of the mountain. And sometimes we wait a long time to get there, to have these cheers and these victories in our life. And we had that type of thing in Australia for a long time. I can still remember when we came here in 2008, there was this economic crisis. I mean, it was just doom and gloom and bad news. Property values fell. Things went from bad to worse. I mean, super afterwards fell and all those things. But as the years gone by, our house prices skyrocketed again, especially if you lived in Melbourne and Sydney. Our super was gaining more value. Unemployment was back to normal. It was low. And of course, our trade with China was good. Things were in and out, and people made bad profits. But now it's COVID-19. Our house prices are falling. I tell you that people borrow against their super. The other day I heard on the news that almost 3 million people over the last couple of months borrowed almost $30 billion from their super funds. Not what I say, it's what I hear on the news. Unemployment is at an all-time high. And of course, China, I don't even have to talk to you about that because we live in a farming community and our farmers are touched by it. We live in difficult circumstances. And this journey of loneliness is starting all at a high point for Elijah and also for us as we lived in wonderful circumstances. And then we find one thing happening, and Elijah found that in his life when you read Elijah chapter 19 verse 2. Someone got angry. Listen to verse 2. Then Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah saying, "May the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like that of one of them," those prophets that he killed. And if I can phrase Jazz's words in a modern context, may God help me if I don't kill you by tomorrow this time. And it's interesting to see that this mighty warrior falls by one word. He falls by one word. He went from a hero and experiencing God to a man that runs into a desert with nothing, with suicidal thoughts, depressed, lonely, on a journey away from all the people that supported him. One word, one person speaking one thing. In the last couple of months, we had the same happening. We had one word coming to our life. One word, my friend, COVID-19 or the coronavirus. One word, only one. And with that one word, people loses their jobs. Superannuations is down the drain. Investments are lost by people. Their houses are taken away from them. They lose their property, maybe investment properties. There was life savings down the drain. One word that brought so many circumstances happening in our life. And there's no greater problem as the problem that are invisible. It's not really COVID. It's not really COVID. To Elijah, it wasn't really the words or Jezebel. It wasn't her. It was the words that she said and the effect that it had on his mind. In our circumstances, it's exactly the same. When we hear the word COVID, our minds goes into another mode. For Elijah, it was fear. It was the great fall. It became a great reality when people or a person started to threaten his life. It was so severe and so drastic that he fled into a desert and he wished to die. The journey of loneliness. And you find this man walking into the desert a day by himself. And at the end he falls under a tree, a broom tree, and he says to God, just take my life away from me. I don't want to live anymore. And I'm just wondering today how many of us find ourselves in that circumstances, but by one quick incident, in a snap of a finger, your life changes and it all falls apart. It's difficult. It's terrible. But it happens. I don't know. But one thing that we see, what Elijah does what everybody else or most people does when they are depressed, they fall asleep. It's like their body and their mind cannot cope anymore. So he fell asleep. But there's one thing that we must understand, is that God is always faithful. He never leaves those who love him alone. He never leaves you to your own device. And we find in God's word a supernatural intervention in this person's life. And I thank God for supernatural interventions. Listen to verse 5, where he says, and then he lay down under the tree and he fell asleep. And verse 5 says, at once an angel touched him and said, get up and eat. God supernaturally intervened into people's lives, sometimes without us seeing or knowing it. I spoke to you in the beginning about my mom, and I think I would like to end maybe with the end of her story. We went to visit in South Africa, and the plan was to bring my mom back to Australia for a long visit. Everything was bought, everything was paid for, visas, everything, airline tickets, the whole toot was done, boom. And then when we got there, we found my mom in a journey of loneliness, a broken woman that says, I can't and I don't want to go with you. And you know, sometimes when you have a struggle with people, you think to yourself, oh, just get out of my life. But my mom had an angel touching her. And that angel's name was Erna. Because it was Erna that stopped me and said, this is your mom. Look after her. Care for her. Erna was the one that automatically or after a while helped my mom to get along, to get up, pack her stuff, the little bit that she had, and she had almost nothing, to bring her to Australia. A sick woman, very skinny, and we brought her to Australia. And I say that Erna was my mom's angel because of this. Because while we were in Australia, I got this phone call months later. My mom was here. And this person said to me, are you so-and-so? I said, yes. And I was a bit hesitant. Who are you? And she said, no, I'm such and such a person. And I'm phoning you with regard to your aunt. Now, my mom and my aunt lived in the same house. They had their addictions, they had their struggles, they lived together, but they almost had separate lives. And this person that phoned me said that they broke into your aunt's house, your mom's house, and they brutally attacked, raped, and killed your aunt. Now I say, Erna was my mom's angel, because if my mom was there, she would also have been killed. Sometimes God intervenes into people's lives in a wonderful way. He intervened into my mom's life and she was safe. Elijah experienced the hand of God in his life. And then automatically we understand that from God's word that he was fed, he was strengthened by what he has eaten, because he had to go back. And then in verse 13 we hear the words of the Lord that says, "Then the voice, God said to him, 'What are you doing here, Elijah?'" Now I want to ask you this question today. What are you doing here where you find yourself? What are you doing there? Discouraged, negative, want to flee away from everybody, don't want to have any involvement, don't call me, don't email me, don't contact me. Maybe you have perfect reason to be the way that you are. But maybe this message is God's supernatural way to intervene in your life, to say to you that you do not have to be where you are, that there is a God that brings bread and a jar of water into your life so that you can be refreshed, strengthened, and go back to where you have come from. Back to go to the pinnacle of the mountain and the calling God has placed on your life. And my prayer today, my friend, is that you will experience that. You will experience such a tangible presence of God's supernatural voice in your mind and in your heart right now where you sit, and to show you that you should go back to where you were. You shouldn't be where you are. God has appointed and ordained you for better. Do not settle for the bush in the desert. Get up and go back. And if I could do something for you and help you to go back, please contact me. Phone us, email us. Somehow we want to help you, because you are special to God. And I want to say to you, to the Grain Shed, you are also special. We want to help you. Reach out to us, and may God give you the grace for that. This is times of trial and tribulations and difficulty, as Elijah has experienced. Remember myself of a song that we used to sing many years ago, a golden oldie, called "These Are the Days of Elijah." And that is such a prophetic song, such a prophetic song. And I want you to join with me now in singing this wonderful song, "These Are the Days of Elijah." Listen to the words, and I tell you, it will resonate with your heart and with your mind. May God bless you and enjoy this song.